I'm just going to speak really briefly about my experience in Egypt last December when I was last there, and particularly the historic women's demonstration, and say something more general about the role of women in the Egyptian revolution. So, firstly, it's really important to say that women helped bring about this revolution. Women helped spark this revolution. Women textile workers in the giant mills of Mahalla sparked this revolution by staging huge strikes there in December 2006. And these strikes, along with many others across the country, set Egypt on the road to revolution in 2011. Of course, we've had the famous 18 days that we all know about in Tahrir Square, and women were really politicized during this process. For many women, it was the first time that they went on demonstrations on the 25th and then the 28th of January last year. These were Christian women, Muslim women, women of all ages, and women brought their children with them. And for the first time, importantly, it's important to say that women weren't ashamed. And they weren't frightened to go out to the street. They weren't frightened to have their voices heard. Tahrir Square and many parts of Egypt had become infamous for sexual harassment during the Mubarak years, and you couldn't walk in some streets of Cairo without being harassed by men. Okay, that music is quite off-putting. Is it possible to?
Yeah,
it's really loud over here.
Yeah, I know. You're right. Is somebody dealing with that? The music is still playing, Amy.
Maybe I can mute.
Or is it off the lappy? Is it off that?
Okay, it's gone.
It's gone.
Muted.
It's done. That's fine done.
Okay, so I was talking about harassment in Cairo. Well, during the 18 days, Tahrir Square was transformed and it became a safe space. Of course, that is once the thugs, the SCAF sent thugs, were pushed out because they were sent there specifically to harass women and try to frighten them out of the square and try to send them home. Women protesting during this period were really defying social norms. They were breaking social conventions by going out alone, going out with their friends, going out at night, sleeping in the square, walking in the streets at night, all things that women in Egypt are consistently told not to do. Women would go out of their homes, defying their parents' orders to stay in the house. Many of my friends had the doors locked on them and they would try to go out the windows or make excuses why they needed to just go out quickly. They'd wait till their parents were asleep and then they would go out. So women were also on the front line in Tahrir. They faced tear gas, they faced gunfire along with their male counterparts. And I think it's really important that men saw women play this role alongside them, because it influenced the way they then saw women after the revolution as well, seeing them as equal to them and united in this struggle. So since the 18 days that overthrew Mubarak, there's been a real toing and froing. There's been a vicious counter-revolution launched against the protesters, and the protesters have been pushed back. What's really interesting is the contrast between the role that women played in the revolution and now their lack of representation in Parliament since the revolution. And during this process of this continuing war of attrition, women have been brought back into the process in mass. And so, for example, the International Women's Day march of last March saw women protesters sexually harassed under the pretext of checking if they were virgins, so the infamous virginity tests. These were carried out by SCAF military officers, doctors, in the Egyptian Museum, and one of these women, Samira Ibrahim, has fought and won a case in court declaring this practice to be illegal. I think what's really important to note about these tests, or this sexual assault on women, is that it was SCAF attacking women's bodies, the bodies who had physically occupied Tahrir and brought down the previous regime. And it's this counter-revolutionary tactic of striking at the women's body, humiliating them, treating them in a way that would make them want to go home, in a way that would make them want to retreat. But of course that isn't what we've seen. Instead, women have come out in mass. And I was fortunate enough to be in Cairo during the historic women's demonstration in December. Now, this demonstration, what prompted it is this image of a woman being beaten and undressed, stripped by soldiers in December. She was protesting along with other activists. She's not the only woman that this has happened to. Clearly, this has been widespread practice by the military. But this really, this image, it really struck a chord with Egyptians. For good reasons or for bad, women are not supposed to go out in the street, and they're not supposed to, well, for bad reasons, they're not supposed to show themselves in this way. And many of the responses to this image from Egyptians, were, from men and from SCAF, was that, well, why was she going out in the first place? Why wasn't she wearing something underneath? You know, if she had been, then this wouldn't have happened to her. So women marched, 10,000 women marched, in the biggest demonstration since 1919, last December, reasserting again their visibility in Egypt and their role in the revolution. I was on that demonstration. There was a real air of seriousness, of anger, of passion, of urgency, determination. It was really, really amazing. There was a slight paradox I felt in the demonstration when I was there. The men stood alongside the women, linking arms to protect them from being attacked, from being assaulted. I thought this was a bit paradoxical, because I felt, and I think the women felt too, we don't need protecting. We're out here on our own. We can do this on our own. So some activists held images of this woman and showed people this image, trying to emphasize that this had really happened. Of course, this image wasn't shown on Egyptian state media television. They would show some of the scuffles between the protesters and kind of present it as a two-sided fight, but this image wasn't shown because it would be just too shocking. And basically really turn people's minds. And actually the response that I saw from people showing this image, a lot of them believed that it was fabricated and didn't really believe it happened. As far as I know, we don't know what happened to this woman. She was apparently taken to a hospital in Egypt, and then when her family went there, she wasn't there. If anyone else has any information on this, I would really like to know. Okay, so you do, brilliant. Okay, so the women's involvement in the Egyptian revolution basically marked, just to conclude, marked a drastic transformation in the social consciousness in Egypt. Women were demanding the fall of the regime, but that included patriarchy and these social norms that made them confine them to the house and wouldn't allow them to be visible or to show themselves, to have their voices heard. This revolution, importantly, I think, shows that there's been a real misrepresentation of Egyptian women, particularly in the Western media, portraying them as submissive, simply because they wear a headscarf or are uneducated or poor. The revolution forcefully counters this image and shows that this representation of Egyptian women is really a falsification of the reality. And women, it's important to note, had very specific demands in the revolution. They wanted the end to laws which would suppress them, divorce laws, child custody laws, which suppressed them. And as we've seen, the case of Samira Ibrahim taking that case through the courts and winning them. I've basically finished. So women, importantly, it's important to say that women have not receded into the background since the 18 days, since defending Tahrir. They've been organising strikes, they've been setting up their own trade unions, they've been defending themselves in military courts, they've been organising strikes, demonstrations and sit-ins, and the massive demo last December shows this. Thank you.